Welcome to today's history class. Like we said in the past, history is an important part of human life because when we have studied the past, we can tread carefully our way towards the future. So, before we get into the details of today's lecture, can anybody tell me what is the capital city of South Africa? You know it very well.
Cape Town.
Of course. The capital city is Cape Town, also known as the mother city. For those that may not know where Cape Town gets its name from, it is because it gave birth to civilization. Life, most of what we call life today, started way back in the Cape. It gave birth to civilization, or like somebody said in the 1930s, in a newspaper article, there was a prediction that Cape Town will in the future become a metropolis. The word metropolis is derived from the Greek and is a compound word. It has two words, which means the first word metro, which means mother, and the other word polis, which means a city. So these two reasons give rise to the name Mother City, because it gave birth to civilization just as mothers give birth to children. And Cape Town is a very beautiful city. You can see from the picture here, you should just make your trip there and it will be worth your while. So recapping from last session's lesson details, we spoke on South African indigenous people, the people who lived for more than 20 years in the South African plains. I don't know if you remember them, but then I'll give you the first one. You must give me the second one. We spoke about the San the last time we were here. Who are the second group of people who inhabited the plains of the Southern Africa?
The second people are the Khoi people.
Yes, the Khoi people lived together with the San people, together not in the same place, but then at the same time. And so these were two groups of people who had different ways of living. For example, for starters, like you see in the picture here, the San people, they were hunters and they were gatherers. You see the guy in the picture has a bow in the sack bag that he has there. They were hunters and they kept on hunting animals for food, and they had to go around gathering tree roots and fruits so that they can eat. Is there anything you can say about the Khoi? Anybody raise their hand and speak anything on the Khoi? Because it seems like they were living in opposites. If these ones were doing this, the other ones were living a different way. If these ones were hunters and gatherers, how were the Khoi people?
I think the Khoi people they had livestock. They did not gather food and they did not uh, hunt.
Yes, that is true. The Khoi people domesticated livestock. They kept livestock and they grew them, and that was their source of food. They had mini gardens, unlike those ones who were all over the place. This ones stayed in one place and domesticated the animals. So now, what point can you say about the San? One trait of the Sans.
Um, the San people were moving from one place to another. They didn't stay in one specific area. They were migrating from one to another.
They kept on moving. They did not stay in one place because they could not domesticate animals. If they are in a place and they finish all of the meat here, then they will have to move. If they finish all of the water here, they have to move from where they are to the next place to find water. That is true. That is right. They were always migrating in search for food and then also in search for water. The Khoi people, on the other hand, they build huts and they settle. They were more of settlers. They stayed over long periods in one place, maybe until their resources were exhausted there. But then they were known to be living in one place, whilst the San people were migrating continuously. Last point we will speak under the San. These are things that we spoke about in the previous lesson, that the San had chiefs who are ruling them. They believed in a system of rulers. One man could preside over the whole village. And the Khoi were living opposite this. What would you say about them?
Since the Khoi had rulers who were ruling them, so the Khoi had no rulers. They had leadership by consensus.
Yes, if the Sans were having chiefs, these ones, their way of government was through consensus. Many people had to agree on something. If a matter had to be discussed, everybody was supposed to be involved. Everyone who was of age was brought together and they discussed everything they had to discuss. So this was just recapping on the last lesson we had. And it's good to know that you still remember the fact. So now, in today's lesson, we are going to be diving into another group of people who were not indigenous. They were not the natives. They were not living here. They came from somewhere. So these were the Dutch people. So in today's lesson, we are going to cover them. Who were these Dutch people? We are going to speak about their arrival in the South African country, particularly in the Cape. So we are going to discuss when they came into the country and how they actually made way over to the South African plains. We will discuss why they chose to settle in the Cape. What was their motivation for settling in the Cape? We will again discuss things which came forth from their settling in the Cape, like slavery. We will speak about slavery in the Cape. We will understand why were slaves brought to the Cape. And then again, we will understand where were these slaves coming from? Where were they taken before they were brought to the Cape? That is today's lesson. If you can see this guy, compared to the pictures you were seeing of the natives people who were indigenous to South African plain, you can see the clothes that these ones, they are not the people who were inhabiting the plains of the South African country. Yes, this is a picture of a Dutchman. You can see the clothes. This is a Dutchman. So these guys were a mixture of the Netherlands and the Germans. Yes, they were in between the Germans and the Netherlands. They were famous for trades. They were traders. They were smugglers, and then they were pirates. They were famous for pirating, for slavery, and for smuggling. They were smuggling tobacco, sugar, and gold. This was their business, trading in tobacco, in sugar, and in gold. So the Dutch movement was established by their government as an amalgamation. They were joining together different ports, because at different harbors and bays, they were putting their ports where they could easily do their business of trading in tobacco, sugar, and gold. So as they were keeping on moving, they made way to the port of the Cape, and they arrived here in March of 1647. 1647, they arrived in the Capes. They came using ships. There was no other mode of transport through which somebody can cross the ocean waters. So they had to come using ships. And so then in the year 1652, it is important that you remember this, because then questions love to play around this. You should know what happened when. So in 1652, a refreshment post was established in the Cape. So it was now formalized that there is a post. Whenever we are traveling, there is a post that is at the Cape where when we are tired, we can rest. So sailors who were worried, they could rest there. Whenever they are journeying, they could know that it was more like a B&B of the time. You know, when you're traveling, you're thinking of, oh, there is a post at the Cape. So then the sailors would head there and then they would rest. The second thing which the post was doing was that it was supplying the VOC ships which were going to Asia with fruits, vegetables, and with meat. So they would pass them and they would get a supply of fruits, vegetables, and also of meat. The other thing about the post is that the post now became a permanent thing. It was known now permanently because its location was just perfect. Where the Cape was, it was a halfway mark on the sea route between Europe and Asia. So it was in the middle, so they decided to make it a permanent post. They knew that we're gonna get fruits, we're gonna get vegetables, and we're gonna get meat at the post. And when we get tired, we are going to rest there. They made the post permanent. And now with making the post permanent, remember the Dutch, they were smugglers, they were pirates, and then they were involved in trades, tobacco trading, sugar trading, and also the trading of gold. And so this led to the formation of slavery in the Cape. Now, because of these guys were outnumbered, there were not a lot of them. And so to continue in their business, they needed to bring in more hands. So now the slaves had to be brought over into the Cape. Now, here are some of the reasons why the slaves were brought to the Cape. The first thing was that when the posts were introduced there at the Cape, the locals, some of the locals were supposed to be working there at the sugar canes, working in the tobacco plants. So, but then now there was an issue because there were diseases which broke out and they were not immune to them. There were some illnesses which were killing the locals. And by locals, this would mean the Khoi and the San, some of them. So they were dying. And as a result of this, the Dutch people had to bring slaves using their ships. Another reason was that some of the locals were uncooperative. Some, they were, remember, for example, like we spoke about the Khois, that they did not have rulers. So they were not used to a system of serving somebody. So some decided to pull back. They were hostile. They did not allow themselves to serve these guys who were in their land. So because of this, guys who were uncooperative, the Dutch had to bring slaves so that there could be an extra source of labor at the Cape. Are we together up to this far?
Yes, we are.
Yes, and then one of the other reasons they had to bring slaves to the port was that slaves were a cheaper form of labor. They knew that they could rob them, they would make them do the harshest of all works and pay them the minimum wage. So they had to bring slaves so that they do not spend much on labor. So these are the reasons, some of the reasons why slaves were brought to the Cape. It was, in a nutshell, they were seen as labor tools. They were supposed to help in the tobacco plantations, in the sugarcane plantations. They had to help in the trade of the Dutch people. And just before we forget where the slaves were coming from, the ships took slaves from different places. Some were from India, others were from Zanzibar, and others were from Madagascar. Do not forget this. India, Zanzibar, and Madagascar kept on supplying the Cape with slavery. And so now I want us to just quickly jump into a Kahoot questioning, and because I realized that we're having internet issues, so we're just gonna answer the questions from the teacher's computer. So you will be shown a screen with the question, and then you will be given multiple choices to choose, and then you're gonna look at the right one. And then since you cannot connect at the moment, you're just gonna say the answer. Then we'll move over to the next slide, which has the answer. That is clear, right? It's not hard. You understand?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay. Here's the first question now. How were slaves brought to the Cape? How were slaves brought to the Cape? There are 4 answers there. Was it by cars, by trains, by aeroplanes, or by ships? What is the correct answer?
They were brought using a sea transport, which is using ships.
Yes, they were brought using sea transport, which is ships, like we said, from Zanzibar, from Madagascar, and from India. They were brought using ships. Next question. When was the VOC established? When was it established? You might also remember from the previous lectures, was it 1600, 1652, 1752, or 1639? What's the correct answer?
It's 1652.
1652, yes, that is true. The VOC was established in 1652. Let's move to the last one. From which 3 countries were slaves originally from? From which 3 countries were the slaves originally from? What's the correct answer?
The slaves were brought from India, Zanzibar, which is Tanzania, and Madagascar.
Yes, the answer is green. India, Zanzibar, and also Madagascar. So you must expect this type of questionings. Multiple choice always comes this way, and the questions are always just around here, and everything else is easy and easier. And that will be all for today. For the next lesson, we will be looking at the life of a slave. We will be getting into their minds, stepping into their shoes, understanding how was it like for a slave? How were they living? The kind of life they had to live. We're also going to discuss the cause and effect of slave resistance in the Cape, because some people resisted the Dutch rulership and they fled and joined other indigenous groups. There was a lot of resistances. Some stayed as slaves, some resisted. So we're going to discuss the causes and the effect of slave resistance in the next lesson. And we are also going to speak on the legacy of the slaves. The legacy of the slaves. So make sure in the next lecture, we have your smartphone, you have your notes, because we are going to get deeper into it all. This will be the end of the lesson. Do you perhaps, class, have any question before we wrap it up?
No, there are no questions.
No questions. Thank you for joining today's lesson. Let us meet next time.